on the use of antidepressants by children with experts from the pharmaceutical industry, the American Medical Association, and the Food and Drug Administration. A House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee held this 6-hour, 10-minute hearing.
Subcommittee will come to order. Today's hearing is on the publication and disclosure issues in antidepressant pediatric clinical trials. As part of the committee's jurisdiction over public health, the subcommittee today will examine the publication and disclosure of clinical studies conducted on prescription drugs. What has raised public interest in the disclosure of clinical trial data has been the controversy over the use of antidepressants in children. In reviewing this issue, the subcommittee will be focused on the 15 placebo-controlled randomized studies submitted to the FDA for an indication in children with depression. The FDA found that in 12 out of the 15 studies there was no efficacy that was shown. But also note that only 3 out of the 15 studies have been published as standalone articles in peer-reviewed journals. Therefore, many people want to know what was in the other 12 studies. What do those studies show? Why haven't those other 12 studies been published in peer-reviewed journals? Was there sufficient information available to the public about these unpublished studies to make informed decisions? These are some of the questions the subcommittee will attempt to find answers to today. Given the highly visible public health question over disclosure of clinical studies and the use of antidepressants in children, under the leadership of the former subcommittee chairman of this subcommittee, the Honorable Jim Greenwood of Pennsylvania, the committee launched an investigation 7 months ago. As the central repository of the 12 unpublished studies, and with its own regulatory role in the matter of antidepressants, the committee looked to the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, to obtain much of the information for this investigation. In March of this year, the committee requested records from the FDA and also requested interviews with key FDA officials. Unfortunately, over the last several months, the committee has been met mostly with stonewalling, slow-rolling, plain incompetency from the FDA. That's not acceptable. The FDA's lack of cooperation with the committee in obtaining relevant and responsive information in a timely fashion on a matter that involves the safety of our children leaves me wondering whether this is sheer ineptitude or something worse. The examples of the course of conduct extend for over 5 months. 5 months of this committee attempting to do its job and oversee an agency on a topic of grave concern. I am outraged to learn that an FDA employee in the Office of Legislation was tasked with handling the agency's response to the committee. In other words, Congressional Affairs at FDA is supposed to be there to help the Congress get information from the FDA. This individual's response was to defy the document request contained in a letter that I signed, and this individual unilaterally decided to limit the document request to exclude drafts, internal notes, or memos to the file. And I'm reading this from an email from a Mr. Patrick McGarry to Ann Henning with RE line 8 is Barton question number 8, referring to question number 8 in the March 24th letter that we sent to the FDA. The email states, "Here is my draft of instructions to the CDER employees who have to search for documents for question number 8. He goes on to say, "Please do not include draft documents, notes, or memos to self or file." I don't understand this. Because the question is, provide copies of all records that raise a concern about the safety or efficacy of antidepressants in pediatric or adolescent populations. That was the question. And Mr. McGarry's response was, "Please do not include draft documents, notes, memos to self or file, or incoming communications from non-FDA individuals." i.e. the public business organizations, other HHS operations divisions, unless an FDA employee has forwarded such communication to others with additional questions or concerns. Well, that's not going to work, folks. Is Mr. McGarry in the room? Is he here? Okay, let the record show that if he's here, he's not standing up and showing his face. We'll get that changed. We will get that changed. If you read this email, it's obvious why FDA's document production has been so minimal. The problem is that FDA does not hear the wake-up call we, committee on a bipartisan basis, have been trying to send, or they're choosing to ignore it. We're going to fix that, folks. And we're going to fix it beginning at this hearing. The conduct by the FDA has only reinforced my past sentiments that Food and Drug Administration really stands for foot dragging and alibis. And that is not acceptable. Today's witness for the FDA is Dr. Janet Woodcock, the Acting Deputy Commissioner for Operations. I assume that she is here. Okay. I have a message for you to take back to the Acting FDA Commissioner, Dr. Lester Crawford. If you folks can't fix it, we'll fix it for you. Now, I've instructed my staff this morning in preparing for this that if we have to, we will send our staff people, if necessary, with the Capitol Police to the FDA, and we'll get enough individuals that are familiar with the files, and we'll go through the files ourselves. Do you understand that? Okay. Can you instruct Mr. McGarry? His job is to cooperate with this committee, not to obstruct it. Do you understand that? Let the record show that she says she does understand it. In addition to the problem of cooperation, this subcommittee will also review the FDA's spotty record on sharing results from clinical trial data with the public as required under Section 9 of the Best Pharmaceuticals for Children Act. Although required by law since 2002, the FDA has not published any summaries of the pediatric antidepressants until this year, and almost all of them were just 3 weeks ago after I made a personal phone call to an individual at the FDA. Why did it take so long for the FDA to do its job? While I plan to ask the companies about their publication and disclosure practices, I am also interested in finding out from the FDA why they refused on several occasions to allow the companies to put additional labeling on their antidepressants indicating that the drug was tested in pediatric clinical trials and did not show efficacy. It would seem to me that the first place where disclosure of no efficacy in these pediatric clinical trials should be shown would be the product label itself. I would like to have the FDA explain its reasoning on this point. This committee began its investigation for today's hearing on the publication of clinical trials based on news reports surrounding the possibility that there may be an increased risk of suicide-related behavior in children and adolescents with major depressive disorder, MDD, that take antidepressants. And I would point out that on a bipartisan basis, we had the debate on a bill last night on the House floor, a suicide prevention bill for teenagers and young adults. That vote's going to occur sometime today. We have over 4,000 young people in our country that committed suicide last year. This potential increased risk of suicidal behavior in mostly undisclosed studies is what has raised questions regarding the safety and efficacy of antidepressants in the pediatric population and the release of data to that extent. That's the reason we're having this hearing. Late last year, the Medical Health Regulatory Agency, the British equivalent of the FDA, pulled from public sale all antidepressants for people with depression under 18 years of age, except for Prozac, due to the risk-benefit analysis of safety concerns coupled with a weak showing of efficacy in all of the antidepressant pediatric clinical trials. Likewise, in our country, the FDA has approved Prozac, made by Eli Lilly, to treat MDD in children, yet the products of the other 6 companies present today have not been approved as of today. Much of the controversy is over whether antidepressants really work in children at all. Only one drug, Prozac, has ever been judged by the FDA to be effective for depression in children and received approval for this use. Nevertheless, I note that 4 different antidepressant drugs not approved for children with depression use are prescribed to children at higher rates than Prozac, the only drug that has been approved. As a father of 3 and a grandfather of 2 and a stepfather of 2, I am especially concerned about advances in technology and medicine that can help young people better adapt to learning and to life. After this committee and the Congress passed the Best Pharmaceuticals for Children Act, a number of companies took advantage of the 6-month patent extension in the legislation granted to companies if they perform pediatric clinical trials. The incentives in this law have worked as companies have performed new pediatric clinical trials. I'm happy that Congress's actions have helped to protect and to promote children's health through the performance of such clinical trials. The companies here today all have drugs whose primary purpose is treating depression in adults. Thus, it was only natural to see if these antidepressants also had a pediatric use. This strikes at a major public health need, the development of more treatment options for teenagers and children diagnosed with depression. I am told that 1 out of 6 of our young people is under prescription for some sort of antidepressant drug. That is an amazing statistic. 1 out of every 6 of our children is under a doctor's prescription for some sort of an antidepressant drug. Unfortunately, the increase in the number of trials undertaken by drug companies to try to find treatment options, as I've stated earlier, have so far met with meager results. Today we will review the timeliness and disclosure of these companies in regards to the clinical trials that they have performed for these drugs. In addition, we will hear from them on what practices they've undertaken in regards to the publication of all clinical trial results for their company. Finally, we're going to hear from leading members of the industry to discuss their actions and suggestions regarding publication of clinical trials. We will also hear from them on other issues such as co-prescribing and how we can better inform patients, doctors, and the public of possible concerns and negative results of clinical trials. The bottom line is that we need to ensure that the processes we undertake in our trials ensure that the drugs that the American people purchase are effective and are safe. I am pleased that this committee's investigation may have already played a role in the recent actions and policy announcements by both the FDA and the private sector. These announcements indicate that both will more freely disclose clinical data to the medical community, industry, and the general public. I want to thank our witnesses for attending today, and I look forward to hearing their testimony. With that, I would yield to the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Deutsch, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have